Hello, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Our early meeting tonight, our committee meeting is on the non-uniform pension fund. This was brought to my attention shortly after I was elected to office last year, and we kind of put it off. And so it's something that we can't continue to put off. Mr. Moon has done an excellent job managing the city's finances and assets for the non-uniformed employees fund, but we have some real issues that this council is going to have to deal with. At this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Winningham.
Thank you, Mayor. This is the non-uniform plan we're talking about. It only covers, it does not cover our police officers, our sworn police officers, or our active duty firemen, or we've got 2 district court clerks. They're covered under APERS. Any other employee is eligible to participate in this plan. I mentioned in the memo that's in the packet that there's no immediate danger of anything right now, but a change does have to be made. And we've got 2 gentlemen here with us tonight from GRS that I'm going to turn this over to. They're the ones that prepared the slide. It's a booklet you've got there in front of you. But, you know, basically we've got 2 options. We can change nothing, keep the plan as it is, throw a ton of money into it, and it'll be fine. And when I say a ton of money, we're talking millions. It would be, I think, one estimate they looked at for us, and this was pretty early on in our discussions, it was about $1.6 million a year is what they projected it would take. If we change nothing.
For how many years?
Forever.
Yeah, as long as we have an employee.
To get it,
This
fully
didn't just
funded.
happen overnight.
To get it fully funded would take that much money. So our other option is we change the benefit side and put more money into it, which is what we're proposing to do. So at this point, without delaying anything else, I'm going to turn this over. Mr. Danny White is here from GRS. Danny and his associate, Mr. Blake Orth, they're here with us from Dallas tonight. So we're certainly appreciative that they could come and be with us. So let's use their time wisely and hope we can ask them some good questions. And I mentioned in an email to the council, they'll be available after the full council meeting if there's anything you guys think of between now and then that you'd like to ask them. Okay?
All right, very good. It's a pleasure to be here, members of the council. As Tyler noted, this is the presentation we put together. It starts with the current state, you know, what's the current plan, what's the current financial condition, some of the demographics behind the plan. And there were a lot of scenarios, design alternatives that were looked at, excuse me, both defined benefit, defined contribution. And what we're focusing on today was a design alternative that the pension committee felt was most palatable. And of course, that's up for discussion on that, but that's the alternative that's being provided today. So that was slide 2, kind of the agenda of it. So slide 3, the current plan. Tyler noted the participation. One additional comment is it covers full-time employees only. It does not cover part-time employees. Vesting in is 10 years. You're always vested in, the employees are always vested in the money they contribute. They contribute 6% of pay. They always get that back. But in terms of any employer-provided benefit, they need to be there 10 years. The benefit itself is very straightforward and easy to understand that you get a monthly benefit or an annual benefit paid monthly, and it's equal to 50% of your last calendar year's pay. Okay, so it's not related to any service. You know, once you're vested in that benefit, the actual growth of that benefit occurs as your compensation occurs. Okay, it's going to grow up with half of that. To be eligible to commence that benefit is you need to be 20 years of service. So if you start at age 25, at age 45, you're retirement eligible and you're eligible to leave the city and start your benefit at that time. And it's paid for the duration of your lifetime. And then for those who come in late career, you can start at age 60 with 10 years of service. Currently, the funding strategy for the plan, even though it's a defined benefit plan, it's kind of thought of and financed like a defined contribution plan, and that is the employees put in 6% of pay. During this last year, that equates to about $500,000 or $550,000 a year. The city puts in 6% of pay, call it a match, or it's just the financing mechanism in place, even though it's untied to their benefit. and that's the same amount, about 550,000 a year. And then there's also an outside additional revenue source, and that's a portion of the city's property tax proceeds. And that's been in place for, I don't know, 20, 30 years from what I understand.
1966.
And this last, the revenue from it is about 400,000 a year. So those are your revenue sources to provide the benefit. Slide 4, if we look at, plan design, looking at retirement behavior of the current retirees in the plan, excluding beneficiaries or disabled retirees, but those who just take a service retirement benefit, you can see, how much age and service they had when they decided to commence that retirement benefit. And so again, its design, influences employee behavior in terms of when they're going to leave the city. And of course, at these younger ages, are they retirement, or they're looking for another career? In terms of slide 5, we get into the current financial condition. So where are we now in terms of finances? So actuarial valuations are performed every 2 years, and the last one's performed January 1, 16, and the next one's going to be performed January 1, 18. So in a process of evaluation, we take the assets that are actually in the plan, and then we calculate a liability. And to calculate the liability, we actually look at the plan census data. We receive the employee information, retirees, how much are the retirees receiving in benefits, what's their age, demographic profile, and we apply assumptions to it in terms of life expectancies or retirement rates to project out what's that liability, what are the promised benefits and what's the value of that benefit today. I refer to that as an actuarial accrued liability. And this is, as of 1/1/16, it's $31.6 million. If you think of it in terms of demographics, so part of that's is payable to active employees that haven't even retired yet. And then you have a number of retirees already receiving pension benefits. And so if we were to separate and look at these in isolation, it's about 50-50 in terms of that liability. In other words, about 16 million of this liability that's on the books, it's on the city's books, the city's financials, is due to retirees. These are people who are no longer with the city, but you're providing a lifetime benefit to. So it's not all due to just current active employees. It's not something that you design away.
Can you give me that number again? I'm sorry.
It's about 16 million due to retirees currently receiving retirement benefits. The present value of that liability. So the annual benefits that are paid is about 1.7 million a year. So if you think of it like a bond payment or something, it's the present value of those future expected payments.
Thank you.
Yep.
So in calculating the liability for our current employees, is that just people who have reached that potential retirement age, meaning they've been here long enough but are still working, or is it just anything they paid in, just their contributions or our contributions or both, or?
It's their contributions as a minimum, so that's a minimum benefit. It factors in those who are already vested or those who are retirement eligible. Yes, it factors in those. There's a group of people who are not vested, and we don't assume everybody makes it to vet, through that time period. And so there's a discounting of that as well. It's only a portion of that.
So this is more like worst case scenario.
Well, I call it a best case.
Okay,
I mean, it's,
well.
in terms of, it's what we think, is representative of your obligation, the city's obligation. So if you take a difference between this, of the liability and the assets, this is the unfunded liability. It actually sits on the city's financial statements. Okay, it's in the books. The funded ratio of that, if you just take the, what is this in terms of assets over liability, it's 33%. If you're looking cash flow, you're paying out 1.7 million in benefit payments. It's actually about 1.6. There's also 100,000. These are refunds. People who leave before they're vested, and there's a refund of their contributions, about 100,000 of that. It's a small amount, but it's part of it. And then the 1.5 million in contributions, this is all sources. This is employee money, employer money, and part of that tax proceeds we talked about. So yes.
You mentioned here our funded ratio is 33%. Obviously, you'd like to be 100% funded. But it's not required. And what would you say a good goal for the plan, 80% would be?
There's a lot of popular press about financial, what's sustainable, or what's sustainable system. And there's a lot of popular press out there about 80%, and kind of where that goes to is if there is a market downturn, you're still able to weather some of that. I think as a profession and as the consultants for the plan in the city, we still are going to, any recommendation we give, if you ask us, Mr. White, what's your recommendation? It's always going to be something with a goal to get to 100%. But it is ultimately a city decision how much, what they want to target or what they want to fund. There's no federal requirements or state requirements, although continuously maintaining an underfunded plan can have other implications, like if the city ever wanted to issue debt, they're going to look at this as an obligation or a liability, and that could affect your ability to borrow money or what you're borrowing money at.
And now to take that all a step further, in 2016, as you point out, there was a negative cash flow in the plan of about $200,000. We paid out more, distributed more than we took in. At some point, if that trend continues and the assets are at zero, what that would mean is the difference would just come out of the general fund. So,
Yep.
Just current money.
Right.
And so that's part of the reason we're trying to shore it up to last longer, where inflows exceed outflows, and build that up closer to 80 or whatever we decide it needs to be.
And that's one of the reasons we're here today is this cash flow, this benefits being paid out is just going to grow. It's not going to get any smaller. It's going to grow. In terms of, and it's going to grow much faster than the projected contributions you're going to receive. And so we actually got a forecast. We'll show you out there, and I'll highlight when that actually occurs. I mean, we've done projection analysis, and on the current plan, it's about 2033 or 2034 is when assets will be depleted. And that's exactly right. You have an obligation to provide benefits, and we'll show you what that obligation is. Slide 6, we've hit on, kind of the behaviors of retirement demographics. Let's look at the active employees who are covered or earning benefits in the plan right now. We've got them broken down by age and service. And this is as of 1/1/18. It's the most current available. And you can just see from the behavior, there's very few beyond 20 years. Okay, that's when you're eligible to retire. In terms of turnover, I mean, you have a lot of employees who, have less than 5 years of service. It's about 133 out of the 251. And if I looked at this 2 years ago, the demographics was about the same. This is just a type of the occupation that is being covered. There just tends to be a lot of turnover early on. Now, after they've been there a while, they're staying with the city, but there can be a lot of turnover early on. Of the 251 employees, 64 of them have 10 or more years of service right now. So that's the 37, 18, 6, and 3. And they're 100% vested.
At 10 years, you're vested.
You're
so you got
vested.
Approximately 64.
Yep. Okay. So let's look on, really the alternative. Like I said, there was about a dozen alternatives that were looked at. They weren't all just defined benefit. There were some defined contribution plans that looked at, what if it was a 401k type benefit? Financially, what would that look like in terms of benefit adequacy? And the design that we've been asked to speak to today is the one you're seeing right here now. And so it's going to be broken up into really call it 2 tiers of benefits. You have Tier 1 and Tier 2. Tier 1 are current employees with 5 or more years of service. Some of that was looking at a cutoff line in there. So it's more than just those who are currently vested. And what the message there is, the city wants to honor the current benefit that's being promised to them. Okay, and then that same amount, the employees are going to, that commitment is going to continue to contribute 6%. On the employer side, the city side, it is to kick up the contributions there to better fund the plan. And that's just a financing mechanism. But that's tier 1. Okay. And then this item of tier 2, this will be a new layer of benefits, and these would be people with less than 5 years of service, and then would also be all new employees that come in. And so the benefit would no longer be just 50% of what your last pay is, but it's 2% times an average pay. It's a 5-year average times your service. So if you think of it, if somebody needs to work 25 years, if you work 25 years times that 2%, you get 50% of your pay. So it's essentially you're working more years to earn the same level of benefit. It's designed to be more equitable in that you're not earning all that benefit up front and earn it all once you get fully vested. And then also, if that person does continue to work beyond 25 years, then that percent of their final average pay continues to increase. So there's try to remove some of that incentive to retire right away or immediately. So it's up front it can be a lower benefit, but to a long career employee it can be a larger benefit to the person. Eligibility is also different. It's also in the proposed plan it would require the person to work more years to be eligible, 28 instead of 20. Or age 62 with 20 or 65 with 6 years for those late career people that come in late career. In terms of the eligibility for retirement, there was a lot of discussion again with the committee about what to do. There was a lot of comparison of what Arkansas State employees plan is, other city municipal plans, and then also from an HR perspective, what are they trying to drive in terms of employee behavior, in terms of retirement.
Would you go over one thing again, please?
Yes, sir.
Under the benefit, we talked about the eligible after 28 years. Go through that again, explain that again if you would.
Okay. So you would be vested after 10 years, but let's say you leave at 20 years. You leave the city at 20 years. You have, yes, thank you. Vested after 6. You just can't start that benefit right away because you haven't met the service eligibility. So somebody, like right now, after they get 20 years of service, they can leave the city and they can start right away. And so you're setting that hurdle further out to when, if they decide to leave the city, or how long they have to work at the city until they can actually turn around and start that benefit. They actually have to have 28 years with the city now.
Okay. So, for example, is this saying if I'm 20 years old and I work 2 years, my 2 years times the 2% is 4%. At age 65, do I get 4%?
You have to work 6 years to be vested.
Okay, so there's still a minimum vesting period of 6
Yeah.
years. So if I happen to work 6 years, that multiplies up to 12%. So at age 65, I can start drawing 12%.
It was 12% of your pay back when you left. Yep, that's exactly right.
okay.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
You understand that correctly.
So basically, in that scenario, if someone happened to quit when they're 25, had 6 years vested, 40 years from then, so age 25 to 40, we'll start paying them on a 12% basis.
Yep. That's right.
I just want to make that clear, because it's vastly different from what we do now, so.
It is. So if you take that, so compared to the current plan, you take that 20-year higher at 25, we'll keep it 20. The current plan, somebody could work 20 years, age 40, and start. And here, they would have to work till at least age 48.
Which delays our funding, which delays our ultimate liability, which improves the health of the
It
fund.
is. It does. You're paying more into the plan. They're 8 years older, so they're going to receive that benefit 8 years less because of their age.
Okay. And so those employees who never make it to 6 years and they terminate, we do like we do now and refund 100% of their contributions upon termination,
Yep,
and they're just done and out.
they're out. And so on the contribution requirement.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the contribution requirement is, all right, the benefits change also in terms of the employee commitment or the employee cost sharing as part of that plan. That deal is also changing to where now they'll be contributing 10% of pay rather than 6. And then the city's contribution on both tiers on total pay covered, it'll go to 10%. And then, of course, there's continue to be the tax proceeds or tax revenue on top of it, up above that.
Let me ask one more thing. Is participation in this plan optional? If I go work for the city, do I have the option of signing up for this or not?
That's the board intent, is to keep it optional.
Okay, I mean, so there's no, the employees are not forced into it. Okay, if an employee doesn't pick it immediately, can they pick it up later if they decide to?
We've not allowed them to do it in the past.
Okay.
Just, I'll hit a couple things before Danny moves on to his graphs. I've got a summary sheet to hand out to the council to keep with you. A couple of other changes that are not mentioned here. We did talk about the vesting now goes from 10 years down to 6. Our current spousal benefit, if you retire and you have a spouse, if you retire and let's say you pass away, your spouse now only gets $50 a month for the rest of the spouse's life. With this new proposed plan, there is a spousal benefit, which is 50% of the 50% employee's benefit, adjusted some, they call it an actuarial equivalent basis. So while the plan is not as rich as it was, there are definitely some aspects of it that are better than what the old plan was. So,
Yeah.
And Tyler, just for comparison, what do we pay for police and fire?
31%.
And one other quick question, the number 251 on page 6, is that the number of employees that are eligible to participate in the non-uniform?
Currently
That are
participate.
Current-
The number that is currently participating.
Yep, currently earning benefits.
Active employees.
I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, the addition of the spousal benefit, was brought up later on in the design discussion, as they were drafting a kind of a model plan document. It does provide survivor spouse benefits if the retiree dies first. And it was set up to be a cost-neutral item. So let's say somebody was going to retire and they were going to get $1,500 a month for the rest of their life. But that benefit would stop at the death of the retiree. And under this option, there's a value to 50% going to the spouse if the spouse is still alive. So the benefit, the initial benefit is not $1,500, it's something less. It's like $1,400 or $1,420. We provided the city a table of factors. It's based on the age of the retiree and what the age of the spouse is when they commence. It factors in the age difference because of a larger benefit if you have a younger spouse.
If you die while you are employed, what is the benefit for the
If you die while you're an employee of the city, we have a life insurance policy that's provided to all employees. I think it's a $10,000 life insurance policy.
And they get no retirement?
There is a survivor spouse benefit. It's essentially, I think it comes out to be the value of the retirement benefit, and then there's a portion of that gets provided to the surviving spouse. It's not the full value.
And what kind of triggered me to mention that is, when an employee comes on with the city, they'll be able to elect whether or not they want to participate in the plan. If this proposed plan gets adopted with this new spousal benefit, when they retire, they'll make another election as to whether or not they want to have that spousal benefit. If they elect not to have it, they can have their full 50% benefit for the remainder of their lifetime, but then their spouse gets nothing if they die.
Okay. Are there any questions on benefit design on the alternative? I'm sure there may be more come up. So let's look at the financials, what this is projected to do. So I'm on slide 8. So the red line, this is the current plan. And the current plan, the contributions, the projected city contributions, this is only the contributions out of the operating budget. This is the 6% of pay. It does not include the tax proceeds. The plan is projected to run out of funds in 2033, and so with that jump in the benefit amount go essentially pay as you go. These are the benefit payments, the projected benefit payments that would have to be paid. In 2017, that amounts about 1.7 million a year. And so you could see, you could just draw a linear line to it, see what the projected cash flow would be. But this would force the city's budget. I mean, you would have to find some ways to finance that. Under the alternative plan, it's essentially your immediate cash costs move from 6% of pay to 10% of pay. That's the move from the red to the blue. And what's noted there is assets are not projected to run out at least the year 2039.
Their projections don't go past, but you can see
Yeah.
it's a steady upward trend.
We're not, in our projections, we're not projecting the size of the city to grow or the size of the workforce to grow. The increase goes with inflationary projections. I mean, your contributions are a function of pay, your benefits are a function of pay, pay just increases with inflation components.
Does the employee ever get a raise every year, depending on how the market or anything like where this money's vested? Do they ever get any kind of increase
There's no
ever?
cost of living increases.
And
No
that-
COLA.
Based on their salary.
Yeah,
So it's, yeah.
no cost of living. That's exactly right.
Well, I know teacher retirement, you do. I mean, there's a cost of living usually in January of each year, if you're,
This one does not have that feature.
Okay.
The current plan and the proposed alternative plan does not have that feature. Slide 9, so we looked at, slide 8, that's your income statement, that's your cash costs. Slide 9, let's look at the balance sheet. This would be representing the city's balance sheet. The red line is the current plan, and so the liability keeps going up. We're subtracting off initially the liability is 30 million. We're subtracting off 10 million in assets, so we get an unfunded of a little more than 20. And that dollar amount has continued to increase. And again, when you get to 2033, 2034, we'll show you the assets are exhausted, and this line is the dollar amount of the projected liability. The green line represents the proposed plan. This is the alternative plan. What would the alternative plan projected to look like in terms of unfunded? And so the unfunded still grows, but it grows at a much more depressed rate. And the next slide, if we look at the components of how this proposed plan change, the red line, the solid red line represents the current plan, the liability of the current plan. The dotted red line, that represents the new projected liability after you reflect in the benefit changes for Tier 2. So you have the new tier of benefits that come in at a different rate. The liability still increases, but it doesn't increase at the same rate. So you've addressed the red through plan design. Now on the green, the solid green represents the projection of current plan assets. And where, again, your assets are depleted in 2034. The solid, or the dotted green line, this represents the new plan. You're paying out less in benefits. Your liability is lower, but also your contributions coming in from both the employee and the city are going up to 10% of pay. 10% on the new tier, and then for the city, it's going to be 10% on all pay and the tax proceeds. And so if you were to take the difference of this between the dotted red line, the dotted green line, that flips you back, and that's the difference we're showing on slide 9. Does that make sense? Are there any questions? So what we're essentially showing on 10 is we're trying to quantify how much of this is being changed or modified by plan design, how much is being modified by the effect you're putting in more cash. You're putting in more contributions.
And then, so basically with the solid lines, you see what happens if we do nothing. Our liability goes through the roof and our assets go to zero. So gives a good picture there.
And the last one, slide 11, is your funded ratio. It's a ratio of assets to liability. As Tyler noted, we talked about the popular press. What's the goal out there? And you often hear about the 80%. And you can see, even with this projected plan out by the year 2040, you're getting closer to 50%, 50 or 60. So it's, in my words, these are my words myself, this is not I would not call this an aggressive attack on trying to bring down the unfunded liability. But it is, I would key it as, it's an approach that's trying to be more holistic when you're looking at city budgets, or you're trying to find a path more sustainable. When you look at this, you're going to be susceptible to what actual experience is. What are actual returns going to be in the market, and other outside demographic changes. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
You had referenced talking about a defined contribution plan. What do some of these ratios and the difference between the unfunded liability look like in any of those scenarios, or did you do that?
We did look at that. I think in particular, the scenario that was looked at was, it was going to be a 12% total, 6% city, 6% employee going into a new plan, just for new hires. And then the question after that is, so that's a benefit.
It would almost move to a totally separate, or?
They're going to be separate, yeah, absolutely.
have to be, yeah.
There's no liability. Once that contribution's made to their 401k account, there's no more obligation or cost, associated with that. The issue at hand, what we found, the issue at hand is you have this unfunded liability, which is $20 million right now, and that has to be financed over actually a shorter period of time, because, at some point, all those benefits come due, and the money has to be there to provide that benefit. Right. In other words, operationally, a plan that has new people coming in can indefinitely operate at 80% or 70%. But when you close a plan, at some point you're forced to be to 100%. By the time those last people move through, you're still making contributions on that liability to make sure there's always money there to provide that promised benefit. And what we look for to solve it, on that defined contribution plan, I had some notes here, I thought, but it was going to take an additional, so once you make the 6% on the employee money, 6% on the employer on the match, and then 6% in the DB, you were going to have to put in an additional 14% of pay. So it was going to be 20% of pay of city money total in tax proceeds to fully fund that defined contribution plan. That was going to be over a period, you were going to be 100% funded by the year 2042. You weren't going to be 50 or 60. But then once you get to that 100%, then those contribution requirements drop.
Right.
So, but you're shifting so much more of that cost up front. So GRS comments on slide 2, these are a rehash of things I've already said about, in terms of what the new plan design does, both in terms of a benefit side, sustainability side, and of course we're gonna, if you ask me, we're always gonna make a recommendation of something to get you to 100%. To us, we believe that should be the city's goal. And in terms when we're working on the 2018 valuation, there's a lot of assumptions that come in to play. One of them's the investment return assumption that was looked at in 16. It's actually 6.5%. You're on the more conservative side, but I think it's more attainable. Okay, so anything you earn above that, that's a gain. That's more money in the plan system than you actually expected. But then we look at also other assumptions. Now we've seen a couple years of experience. We've seen turnover's been higher than we expected. That's more favorable in the liability. People are retiring, after 20 years of service or so, more than we expect. So those are going to offset. And in the mortality assumption, as a profession, you just don't have enough experience yourself to say, all right, what is the mortality experience going to be for the city employees? So we actually look to what is the Arkansas PERS retirement system? What's their what are they assuming for life expectancy for the state? We think that that's representative of probably what your retirees will experience. They're going to update that assumption and, for what they're using for their purposes, and we're going to match it and follow it. And so they're getting ready to move to a stronger assumption. So overall, we expect some net increase in liability and costs from what we showed. Just it's primarily because of the stronger mortality. But I don't think it, the business case and what you see there is largely going to be the same. In terms of next step, this was provided for informational purposes. Again, if you have any questions, this is the time to ask questions about it. This concludes material I was going to present. There's an action that has to be taken place, and then there's also the item of timing. It's something that take into account. I've talked to Tyler about it. That in my opinion, if it's something where an action is taken sometime in the summer, consider an effective date like January 1/19 or so. You got to give city management time to communicate to the employees, develop the employee communication, sit with them, or whatever HR steps are necessary. And then they have to refine their internal processes, make sure contribution rates are set at the appropriate amount. So when that time kicks in, those are right. And then also in terms of benefit administration, have their processes. But that's, again, that's another decision that the city will make.
Mr. White,
Yes, sir.
do this all over the country, I'm assuming?
Yeah.
There's a fair amount. Yes, sir.
This is not the first time you've seen this, I would assume.
It's not the first, by all
It's
means.
not the worst that you've seen.
It is not the worst. It's close. Yeah.
What do other municipalities do?
I think it's,
Um,
I want to say it's like 12%, but there's a dollar amount too.
There's,
50% of what they put in.
I've seen some of them. A lot of it goes to employee relations, You've probably heard a lot about Dallas Police and Fire. It's one our firm's hands are clean of, so. But we saw, being from Dallas, we saw what was going on. Their first approach was make very dramatic cuts for new hires. And it's just because the new hires don't have the vote. The new hires don't complain because they're not there. And so those are the easy choices. But they made dramatic cuts in that regard. And they did work on some additional funding. It wasn't enough. They're looking at some other alternative financing like pension obligation bonds and other creative ways to bring in money. I would say in this case there was a lot of attention in terms of HR culture to make sure whatever benefit is provided to new hires, it's still a good benefit. I mean, it just came down early on from the culture I picked up from the people we worked with. That was important to them. But there's a cost to it. And then in other cases I've seen where municipalities are getting ready to throw a lot of money at it. And that's because some of those, you saw this early on after 2000, after the last market crash. They went through early on, they made the easy decisions for the easy cuts, the low-hanging fruit, and they found out later on it wasn't enough. And so they, some of them ponied up and contributing more. Another example is City of Houston. If you read through, look at the case study for City of Houston. They made changes to all three of their systems.
With the city of Phoenix also.
Yes.
Issues,
Yep, that's another one.
and a lot worse than what we're looking at here.
In terms of Bennett, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
lot worse.
And the contribution increases that are looked at here from 10 is not a lot. I mean, some of these municipalities are putting in 20-25% of pay. It's not going to be forever, but they know that is what's needed.
Mr. Winningham, I've not heard a number yet.
I've got it for you.
I figured you would. Thank you.
Got 2 pages for
Mr.
everybody.
White, thank you. I appreciate that.
The first page summarizes the difference between the current plan and the proposed new plan, and then the second page shows you the budget effect to go to 10% contributions for the city.
Tyler, let me ask a question. If an employee says they absolutely cannot contribute 10%, I mean, are they just out of the plan altogether?
They would be out of that plan. We have a 457 plan, the deferred plan, where they can contribute as much as they can afford to. The city does not contribute anything towards that
Right.
plan
Yeah,
for them,
okay.
but it does give them some tax benefit with being able to defer that income on that.
I mean, my concern is some, you know, we'll look at that 4% different from 6 to 10 as a major setback for them, you know, with their monthly finances and all, but
It is.
I know we don't have a
It-
choice.
It is, you hear that, but the benefit itself is still more valuable than
Oh,
10% of pay.
Mhm.
So it's not like you're asking them
Long
to
term,
contribute up, above and beyond.
Mr. White, could I go back to slide number 5, please?
Yes, sir.
Let me know when you get there.
I'm there.
In the 2016 cash flow, it says that we're paying benefit payments of $1,700,000 a year, and that we have $1,500,000 in contributions coming in.
Just that last year,
Okay.
that was the case. Just that last year of that particular 16, that was the case. Before that, so if you were to look back and trace it back, I think that was one of the first years the cash flow turned negative. So prior to that time, contributions still exceeded benefit payments.
And that's contributions of employees and the city, is that
Yes,
correct?
yes, sir.
Okay. And we currently, as I read this here, we have assets of $10.5 million on the books, is that correct?
That was as of 1/1/16.
Okay.
Today, Mr. Moon is here, he handles the investments, he could probably give us a today number, but as of the end of 2017, it was 11.
11 and a half, okay. Is the $200,000 difference that I see there in the 1.7 and the 1.5, is that something that we can project out over a period of time? Or do we expect that to get wider?
It is. We do project that over time, and that difference is expected to grow. The benefit payments are expected to grow at a faster rate than the contributions.
Okay,
Under the
and
current plan.
that's where I was headed with this, because at $200,000 a year, it'd take 50 years to eat through that 10.5 million.
That's right.
So you just answered my question.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. That's all I had on that.
I'll say the pension board in its capacity looked through, the dozen-plus options that Danny mentioned. We've only presented you with one option tonight. It's the option that the board feels is the best option. As Danny mentioned, it doesn't get us close to even an 80% funded goal, but you can see on that slide, it's an upward trend. Our unfunded liability hopefully is shrinking. The funding of the plan is increasing, and at year 2040 mark, the plan is better off than what it is today. So you can see for audience members that didn't get the handout, to go to 10% contributions for the city is about $420,000 is what it would cost. And that's just to go to the 10% contribution. So if we were to go to, say, a 15% contribution, you can imagine what that number would be like. It's big. So that's one of the reasons this is the plan we presented you. We think it's one it's affordable, and it gets the plan headed in what we hope is the right direction.
Yeah. I mean, we can no longer do nothing. I mean, we have to change, and we have to.
Address it.
And so I spent some time with Tyler and them and looked at some of this, and I do feel they presented the best option to us. But I would like for us to go ahead and proceed to the next steps. I mean, to whatever the next steps
Right.
are to continue discussing this and looking to do something.
We've got a draft new plan document that an attorney has drawn up for us. So if January 1 of 19 is an agreeable goal for the council, this year we'll go through the process of getting that plan document finalized, do employee education, let everybody know what's coming, and we'll work towards that goal through 2018.
And I'd say we also look for other options, if there are other options out there.
Such as,
Don't know. That's why I'm asking.
like other plan designs or
Don't
anything?
ask me.
They felt like this
Don't
was
ask
the
me.
best.
I don't know the
Sounds
answer
like
to
the
that
committee
question.
looked at it.
We have a board meeting next Monday. Wednesday, I'm sorry, next Wednesday. We'll start compiling information. We'll bring Lisa Mabry-Williams in, and we'll start getting some information back to y'all.
Okay.
And I'm sure y'all have looked at this long and hard to
Yeah.
know that this is probably one of the best options,
Yeah, we think it's,
so.
like I mentioned earlier, it's the benefit's not quite as rich as what it was, but it's got components to it that are better. You have the ability to earn more than 50%, so it's,
For sure.
takes longer to get there, but there is a possibility there to retire with more income than what you currently would.
Right.
And the spousal benefit, we think would be
That's a huge component.
huge.
Any other questions of Mr. White or Mr. Winningham tonight? Thank you.
So as I mentioned, they've agreed to stay here through the duration of the council meeting, and they'll be here afterwards. If anything clicks in your mind between now and then, and you'd like to have any one-on-one conversations with them, they'll be here.
Thank you for being here, gentlemen. Pat, thank you for being
Thank
here.
you.
And let's take I think Aaron needs to get with you guys for a minute. It's 6:20. Let's start at 6:35. Good evening, everyone. I'm gonna go ahead and apologize to everybody tonight. I have a cough, so I'm gonna be coughing tonight. I'm not contagious, and I've not had the flu. It's just with me for some reason. Anyway, we always proceed each meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance and a prayer. If you'd like to join us, we'd love for you to.
If you'll bow with me. Our gracious Father, we want to thank you for the abundant blessings that you've given us. We thank you, Lord, for this city that you've made us to be stewards of. We just ask, Lord, that everything we say and do be pleasing in your sight, and we pray, Lord, that in every way you get the glory. Bless us and bless this meeting. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Mr. Jones will not be here tonight. His wife does have the flu, and he's being a good husband and taking care of her tonight. I will now call this meeting to order. Mr. Garrett, please call the roll.
Mr. Hawkins? Here. Mr. Grimes?
Here.
Mr. Pruitt? Here. Ms. Mill?
Here.
Mr. Ledbetter? Here. Ms. Smith?
Here.
Ms. Isby?
Here.
All right, you should have received copies of the January 23rd, 2018 City Council meeting. Any corrections or changes?
Make a motion for approval as submitted.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes as submitted. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 7-0. Next up, we have a report of our standing committees. Hang on a second. Let me get my agenda out here. Yes, we have a report of our standing committees. Mr. Hawkins, this is where you take over, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first item on this portion of the agenda is a resolution setting a public hearing to discuss the closing of the unbuilt right-of-way running through property identified as 2902 Pheasant Road. And, let's see. We'll set that meeting we have a resolution setting it for the 27th of February.
Let's check this out.
Back. Someone like to make a motion to adopt that resolution?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt the resolution setting a public hearing for February 27th, 2018. Any further discussion?
Resolution number.
Be R 1804.
Mr. Garrett,
All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed?
7-0. Mr. Hawkins.
Next item, Mr. Mayor, is a resolution setting a public hearing to discuss closing of a portion of the utility easement on Lot 2 in Lewis Crossing. And we have an ordinance to be read, or I'm sorry, a resolution to be read for this as well. It's Resolution R 1805.
Make a motion for adoption.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt this resolution to set a public hearing for February 27th, 2018. Any further discussion? Mr. Garrett,
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
7-0.
Is this microphone on the back? I don't think I could hear mine either.
Can't hear it.
Hello, test. I'll try and read loud then.
You can use David's.
Next item on the agenda is a resolution requesting the Faulkner County Tax Collector place certified liens on property located, thank you, at 1716 Sim Street as a result of incurred expenses by the city. This resolution is Resolution R 1806.
Make a motion for adoption of the resolution.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt this resolution. Any further discussion?
Is there a representative of the owner of the property at 1716 Sims with us tonight that would like to address this? Mr. Mayor, I don't see anyone.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adopt. Mr. Garrett,
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
7-0. Mr. Hawkins.
Next item, Mr. Mayor, is consideration to accept the nomination. Oh, I'm going to have some help on this one. Patricia,
Glencow.
thank you, for vacancy on the Conway Housing Authority Board, and I move that we accept this nomination.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to accept this nomination for the Conway Housing Authority Board. Any further discussion? Mr. Garrett,
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
7-0. Mr. Hawkins.
Next item, Mr. Mayor, is an ordinance appropriating funds to reimburse the Faulkner County Levy District Number 1 for the herbicide spraying program for the Lolly Levy. And we have an ordinance to read for this item. It's ordinance 01815.
Make a motion that we waive the 3 readings.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to waive the 3 readings. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 7-0.
Make a motion for the adoption of the ordinance.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt this ordinance. Any further discussion? Mr. Garrett.
Mr. Ledbetter?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Isby?
Yes.
Mr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Mr. Pruitt? Mr. Grimes? Ms. Mel?
Aye.
Passes 7-0. Mr. Zilks, you got off easy on that one.
That one was real easy.
Mr. Hawkins.
And we'll find another one for you, Mr. Silks. Let's see. Next item is an ordinance accepting bids and appropriating funds for the purpose of a ceilometer for the existing automated weather observation system for the Conway Airport. Mr. Zilks, I know you're going to tell us about this. We have an ordinance to read for this. It's ordinance 01816.
I'll make a motion that we waive the 3 readings.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to waive the 3 readings. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 7-0.
Make a motion for adoption.
You're going to get off easy again.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt this ordinance. Any further discussion?
I want to know what it is.
I do too.
I knew this was coming.
And did I say it right?
It depends who you ask. But since you read it, sure, you're right.
What'd you call it?
Celiometer.
Oh,
There we go. It's a
knew
big
that.
it's a big fancy word.
I was just seeing if you were listening.
There we go. Big fancy word that is a piece of equipment that tells how high the clouds are. So the weather system that we have gives temperature, wind direction, barometric pressure, lots of things, but it does not broadcast the height of the clouds. So obviously if you're coming into land, that's a pretty critical piece of information to know. That will bring our weather station up to the next level of capability that we currently do not have. It's something that we get asked about at least on a weekly basis. When are y'all going to get this added to your system? When? So through lots of discussion with the FAA, they paid for our original system. They would not pay for this piece of equipment, but they have signed off allowing us to upgrade this. We got 2 bids. The low bid from J&R Engineering, about $12,000 lower than the second bid that we have. These guys currently do the maintenance on our system, so they know it. We know what we're getting by going with them, and I don't have any reservations about using these guys at all.
Thank you.
We have any further discussion? Mr. Garrett.
Mr. Ledbetter?
Yes.
Ms. Isby?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Mel?
Aye.
Mr. Pruitt? Mr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Mr. Grimes?
Passes 7-0. And I don't know if any of you have been out to the airport lately. Mr. Zilks has been working hard on the bush hogging and keeping things looking good. It looks really good out there, Josh. I've had a lot of folks brag on it. Mr. Hawkins.
Next item, Mr. Mayor, is consideration to approve the proposal for fleet maintenance services for the city of Conway. And Ms. Bryce, you have your name on this one, so come up and tell us about this.
Good evening. On January 16th, we received 3 proposals for fleet maintenance services and evaluated them. I'd help with evaluating those from sanitation and police. 3 proposals were received, and we recommend that Green Toad Tire and Auto be approved.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second to accept this bid. Any further discussion? Mr. Garrett.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Passes 7-0. And I'd like to publicly thank Ms. Jamie and also Hugh Austin of Austin Brother Tire. Hugh chose not to bid on this, but he spent a lot of time with Jamie and I in helping us put together a good plan. So Hugh, if you're watching, thank you.
This takes the place of what we were doing out at the sanitation department, is that correct?
It does.
Yes.
Okay. Is there any reason that we're not going to continue doing it that way?
There's a couple of reasons, actually, Mr. Hawkins, there are several. One, and
Message
Mr. Hopper is
forward.
here, he can actually tell you more than I can, but they're having trouble hiring mechanics at the salary that the city pays.
Okay.
And the majority of their work is done on police and fire vehicles. And after we discussed it with the police chief and fire chief and everyone else, we think it's imperative that we have good folks working on our vehicles. So, and we also rolled those 2 positions into the sanitation fund, which pulled them off the general fund.
Okay.
Mr. Hawkins.
Next item, Mr. Mayor, is consideration to remove fixed assets inventory from the permits and inspection department. And Ms. Bryce, you're on this one too.
Yes, sir, I am.
What can you tell us?
You should have a copy. This is a truck, or actually 2 trucks that are no longer running. Fleet maintenance recommended that it was probably better to sell them instead of pay for the cost of repair.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to remove the fixed assets from inventory. Any further discussion? Mr. Garrett.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Passes 7-0.
Next item, Mr. Mayor, is consideration to remove fixed assets inventory from the street and engineering department, and third time's the charm.
Thank you, sir. This is one more truck that we're selling. It has reached its life. I believe the street has worn it out completely. May have a little scrap value. And I want to take just a second, if you don't mind, to tell you right now, today at 4:50, I ran a report that showed how much the city has made in less than a year on gov deals from selling things like this that you all have approved us to write off. To date, at 4:50, we have sold $193,000 worth of inventory. And I can't take all the credit for it because the departments have worked very hard to make that happen.
Good news.
That is good news. Thank you.
I make a motion, we approve this disposal.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the removal of the assets from the fixed inventory listing. Any further discussion? Mr. Garrett.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
7-0. Mr. Hawkins.
Next item, Mr. Mayor, is an ordinance, let's see, to approve a traffic calming procedures for the street and engineering department. And Mr. Vinson, I knew that you were here earlier. There you are. Come on up and tell us what you can here.
Sir, as requested by the council, enclosed are an ordinance which includes a $250 application fee and a resolution which does not include an application fee for traffic calming. Those are the major differences between these 2 options that we discussed last month. A few other minor differences include that the resolution requires a larger traffic calming committee, and if the application is denied, the committee cannot reapply for at least 5 years. Basically, the differences are the $250 fee. So if the council's desire is to include the $250 application fee, then you should pass the ordinance. If you do not want to include said fee, you should pass the resolution.
I make a motion that we pass the resolution.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the resolution for traffic calming procedures. Any further discussion?
Finley, either way, is it still set up where if it meets certain criteria, the city will pay for installation, and if it does not, the neighborhood can choose to pay for installation?
That's correct, and at the end of both the ordinance and the resolution are the requirements, which have not changed since the last time we spoke.
Neighborhood can always pay for it.
Well, in certain circumstances, though, it qualifies for the city to pay for it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's relatively rare, but yes.
But for some reason,
Yeah,
And
they
that-
may-
always have the right to do that.
And that has to do with
Well,
number
not if we
of
don't
vehicle
allow it.
trips.
It's mostly speed, actually.
Okay.
Yes.
And what's the cost of one should someone in a neighborhood want to talk about that? Do you have an estimate on that?
I do. Of course, one of the things that I desire to change with this is the way we've been doing it historically is by only putting in speed humps. I'd like to change that and put in a variety of different traffic calming devices. But as an example, a speed hump costs somewhere around $1,500.
Okay. What other devices might be available?
Well, we just put in some radar speed sensing signs on Winfield that I think have been working very well.
Yeah,
Good feedback on
yeah,
that.
we have.
Yeah.
It lights up and tells you real quick.
Yeah, it does.
Not that I've been caught.
Yeah.
Finley, is there any restriction on the kind of street? I thought I read that somewhere, that it had to
Yes,
be a
it's still-
true residential street?
It still must be a residential street.
Any further discussion?
Of course,
I'm sorry.
I apologize.
Go ahead, Finley.
The purpose of that is that the application is intended for people that live in residential
In the
neighborhoods. This
neighborhoods.
does not limit mine or the city's ability to put in traffic calming on other local roads. But for the purposes of this ordinance or resolution, it's intended, the application is intended for residential neighborhoods.
Any further questions? Mr. Garrett?
All right, so the motion was for the resolution. It'll be R 1807. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Passes 7-0. Mr. Hawkins?
Can I follow up with one thing, though? Finley, if over the next whatever time period, you find that this resolution is not working as you wish because of no fee, would you alert us of that so we can perhaps revisit if needed?
Sure thing. Thank you.
Ready?
Yes, sir.
Next item, Mr. Mayor, is an ordinance, and it's an ordinance authorizing reclassification of positions within the street and engineering department. And Mr. Vinson, this is in your wheelhouse once again, so if you don't mind.
Yes, sir. I'm very excited. I've found an engineer to fill one of the vacancies we have, and so this is a
Good.
reclassification to fill that vacancy.
Make a motion that we waive the 3 readings.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to waive the 3 readings. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
That passes 7-0.
Make
Make
a
a mo-
motion for the adoption of the ordinance with the emergency clause.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt this ordinance with emergency clause. Any further discussion?
When might they start?
I guess Tuesday the 20th, because I think Monday's a holiday.
Okay. So a week.
Yes.
Good. Very good. And I do see here that no additional funds are necessary, but I see there's a change in the salary.
No additional funds will be necessary for 2018's budget.
Okay.
Mr. Garrett?
This will be O 1817. Mr. Grimes?
Didn't say that.
Aye. Ms. Isby?
Yes.
Mr. Ledbetter?
Yes.
Mr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Mr. Pruitt? Aye. Ms. Mel?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
7-0. Did you just have one for emergency clause?
Was there much more?
Thank you, council.
I think
Thank you.
Sheila asked for
Finley.
emergency clause.
Ask her again.
Ms. Isby, did you make a motion with the emergency clause?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Emergency clause, Mr. Grimes?
Aye.
Ms. Isby?
Yes.
Mr. Ledbetter?
Yes.
Mr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Mr. Pruitt? Ms. Mel?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
7-0.
Was that ordinance 18?
It was.
Thank you.
17.
17.
Oh, 1817.
17? Thank you. Next item, Mr. Mayor, is an ordinance appropriating grant funds for the Spencer Street Brownfield Cleanup Project administered through the Planning and Development Department. And Mr. Patrick or someone else want to talk about this? Who wants to do this? Don't know.
I think this is just an accounting move here, Mr. Hawkins.
That sounds good.
I'll
Yes,
make
sir.
a
We have an
motion
ordinance
that
to
we
read.
waive
It's
the-
ordinance 01818.
Make a motion that we waive the 3 readings.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to waive the 3 readings. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 7-0.
Make a motion for adoption.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt this ordinance. Any further discussion?
And just for the record, the grant amount is $3,250, so not just a whole lot of money we're talking about.
Mr. Garrett?
Mr. Ledbetter?
Yes.
Mr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Ms. Isby?
Yes.
Mr. Pruitt? Aye. Mr. Grimes?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Mel?
Aye.
Passes 7-0. Mr. Hawkins?
Next item, Mr. Mayor, is an ordinance accepting the annexation of property east of Highway 25 North, immediately north of Northwood Estates, and we have an ordinance to read for this item. It's ordinance 01819.
Make a motion to waive 3 readings.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to waive the 3 readings. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passes 7, I'm sorry, any opposed? Passes 7-0.
I make a motion for adoption.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt this ordinance, accepting the annexation of 51.72 acres east of Highway 25 north, immediately north of Northwood Estates. Any further discussion?
Can I ask, just one,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
was looking at the map. This is actually east of the old Highway 25, right? Not the new one.
Yes.
It's just like, it's the old one, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Right.
right past where you,
Right,
Yeah.
that's where I live.
Mr. Garrett.
Mr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Mr. Grimes?
Aye.
Mr. Pruitt?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Ledbetter?
Yes.
Ms. Isby?
Yes.
Ms. Mel?
Aye.
Passes 7-0. Mr. Hawkins.
Next item, Mr. Mayor, is consideration of a request to de-annex land south of Highway 319 leading to Cadron Settlement Park from the city limits. And Mr. Atkinson, would you like to come up and tell us about this? If you would, thank you. I appreciate it.
If y'all,
You may recall that I appeared before the council about 15 months ago, trying to get around the fire code in some way, get a waiver that would allow me to sell these lots without having the water up there within the fire code requires that you be within, I think it's 600 feet of a fire hydrant to get a building permit, the way it's being implemented here, which is good. I'm not complaining about that. But anyway, I've been unable to effectively bring water there. It's just not, it's cost prohibitive. And Conway Corp estimate I got last was about $500,000. And if it weren't so sparsely populated in that area, maybe you could get neighbors to share, but there are just not very many neighbors out there. So as a result, I would ask the city to allow me to take this out of the city, back into the county, so that to get around that requirement. Not something I choose to do. I'm just sort of forced by the expense of the water to do it. And there are 3 landowners in this area. One is Jeffrey Sand and Gravel, and they bought the westernmost lot that's shown on the plats that I've provided to you, just as a buffer for them. And then there's one other landowner, and I have his consent. So all this land is, all the owners are seeking this de-annexation or detachment.
Is there not any notice requirements or anything requiring these hearings with the county to accept it back in?
I spoke with Mr. Hogue this afternoon about that, and the way I read the statute and the ordinance that I prepared seeks approval from the county to accept it, and Mr. Hogue and I visited, and I think that's just a formality. So what I plan to do if the city approves this is next I'll send an ordinance to the county court to his attention on behalf of the same landowners, asking that they accept it back into the county.
the old discussion, the previous discussion is attached to this. Yeah.
You're okay with this, council?
Okay.
You're good?
I think so.
Can be done, as long as the county's willing to take it back.
Okay.
It sounds like they can do that.
Okay.
I don't know if there would be any plans in the future to request the reannexation after development.
That's what, or whoever's buying it.
It won't be me,
Yeah.
likely.
Just need to remember this night that they asked out. Remember that, they try to ask back in.
I know.
Now, Jack Bell has brought to my attention that he would like to leave an option open for the city to bring the park in, Cadron Settlement Park. And of course, there would need to be the contiguity that's going to be lost tonight if you approve that. But I would certainly be open for any kind of way to make that work if the city wants to do that in the future. Jack's told me that I think that you've never been able to get a response from the Corps of Engineers on that property as to whether they would.
That's correct.
But the owner that's buying the property knows that you're de-annexing it and not, I mean.
I have a pending
if
sale,
they- Yeah.
and that's the contingency of that sale, that it'd be de-annexed.
So they would be aware of it. Then I'm,
Motion that we approve the de-annexation of this lot.
Second.
second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second that we approve the de-annexation of this property. Any further discussion?
Do we need to have any contingent on there that it gets approved through the county first?
It requires an ordinance, and you'll have a copy of that attached to that map, so just, it's not just a simple vote, it's gonna have to have an ordinance too.
Okay.
It's going to propose ordinance, and that should be part of the motion.
From my reading of the state code, and Mr. Atkinson can correct me if I'm not hearing that right, but by our research, these orders could be attached.
And he's prepared that.
Where
And
is
we
it?
have copies of it?
Where is
Yeah,
it?
It's
Behind that.
Hand it out. With the picture,
Okay.
with the map.
So,
Oh, I see
Wes,
it. I got it. I got it.
you want to make, Wes, do you want to make a motion to waive the readings and do this, or?
Oh,
since
yeah.
you-
Yeah, we do need.
Yeah, I make a motion to waive.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to waive the 3 readings. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 7-0.
This will be
All right, you're gonna have to walk me through this.
19, yeah.
We just go through the normal process and make a motion. Okay. Okay, all right. I'll take a motion and a second to adopt this ordinance.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adopt this ordinance
And it has an emergency clause with it.
for this de-annexation. Any further discussion?
And the emergency clause as
Emergency
well.
clause, I'm sorry.
The emergency clause.
All right. Any further discussion? First time I've had a ordinance pulled over like this. This is a learning experience. Mr. Garrett?
This will be ordinance 01820. Mr. Pruitt?
Aye.
Ms. Mel?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Grimes?
Aye.
Mr. Ledbetter?
Yes.
Mr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Ms. Isby?
Yes.
And the emergency clause, Mr. Pruitt?
Aye.
Ms. Mel?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Grimes? Mr. Ledbetter?
Yes.
Mr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Ms. Isby?
Yes.
Those both passed 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Hawkins?
And final item on this portion of the agenda, Mr. Mayor, is consideration of an appeal of the Planning Commission denial to approve a conditional use permit request for property at 1830 East Oak Street to allow up to 24 units per acre in a C3 zone. That's highway service and open display commercial property. Mr. Palladino is appealing this. The initial vote was 0-7, voting in opposition. And so I would, Mr. Tyler, you just showed up out of nowhere. Welcome.
Not Palladino, that's,
I was gonna say, I was looking for him. There you were.
no, what, I guess it's okay for discussion?
Yes, it is.
All right, my name's Tim Tyler, and I'm representing Mr. Palladino in this. He came to the office, and it's kind of a family deal. He's wanting to buy this property from the family, and it's such a small piece, they really can't do a whole lot with it. And he wanted to know if he could put some duplexes on it, and I said, no, I don't think you can do that with the way it's configured. And we got to looking at it, and then talking to the planning department, they can do, you know, it's kind of a misnomer, but it does tell you, it's asking for quite a few units per acre, 24 units per acre, but they can't put but 10 units on this. So basically, I designed him something for one building only, and it's to the back of the property, and it will be a lot less vehicle trips per day. I don't think, was there any opposition at the?
Yes,
There was?
Yeah, there was one bill at least.
Okay, and again, it's gonna have to be fenced. There was quite a few conditions to the request. But Mr. Palladino he didn't want to put a commercial building up there, which a commercial building would create a lot more vehicle trips per day. But he was okay with doing so. I guess you would call it a multi-family unit, but it's 10 units in one building. And I don't know if there's any more questions I can answer, but that's kind of his. I think you have a little site plan showing the one building at the very, very back. And he's fully aware there is commercial all around it, and he's willing to accept that responsibility.
Any questions for Mr. Tyler? Okay. Would anyone else like to speak for or against this? Would you please state your name and address, sir? I know who you are, but everybody else may not.
My name's Rick Newman. I own a business right next door to it at 1850 East Oak Street. I have a custom car business there. We make a lot of noise. We work all hours of the night and everything else. I don't have objections to them wanting to sell their property and do something with it. It's been empty for many, many years. But you have people living in these apartments. The lot is very small. I don't know where the people would even park their cars with a building built on it. Say even if you just build 10 units, you're still looking at 20 cars to have room to park. You're gonna have children, where are they gonna play? My business makes noise all at night. I do welding, cutting, fabrication, painting. I'd be a nuisance to the apartments. I've been there almost 30 years. My main objection is I have trees growing right along the property line. When they build this building and dig all this up, it's going to cause these trees to die. These trees are right on the property line where 50% of the roots are already under blacktop or concrete. So when you disturb the roots to the left, they are going to die. I requested that they build a wall large enough and tall enough to keep the noise from my building bothering their tenants. And I asked that they remove the trees at their expense so I don't have to have them removed when they die a year from now after what they did to build the buildings. You know, I understand. I'm one that always believed if you own the land, you ought to be able to do what you want to with it, to a certain extent. I don't mind them selling the land. I don't mind them building apartments there. But I don't want to be a nuisance to their tenants, and I don't want their tenants to be a nuisance to me. I don't see where there's enough land there to do what they're asking to do. I don't see how it's feasible, you know, with the amount of land that's there. When you figure your grass spaces, green spots, and all this that y'all require, curb and gutters and stuff, I just don't. Of course, Tim Tyler, I know Tim. He's a surveyor. He knows more about what will fit than what I do, but just for me to look at it, there's hardly enough room for a truck and a trailer to turn around on that lot, much less put all this on it.
Was there anything in the conditional use permit that said that you had to keep your stuff quiet from here on out?
Well, there's no way for my business to operate quiet.
Just all in here?
Okay, I'm saying, is there anything in the conditional use permit that they said that would keep you from doing what you're doing now?
No, they didn't ask for me to quit doing what I'm doing. Nothing.
So it would be on them if they were to move into the apartments. It would be completely on them, not on you.
Yeah, it'd be on them, you know. I just don't see where it's feasible or practical to do it, you know. Somebody should buy out the whole area right there and do something real reasonable, something, you know, there's.
I just don't think you shouldn't have to worry. I mean, unless I'm.
Well, except that when people call and complain about.
But when they call the police
exactly
department
right.
and complain about me, I know most of the officers, but, you know, when people start complaining, you have problems. And I don't want to be a problem.
But he's in a commercial zone.
But I'm in a
so-
commercial zone.
That's what I'm saying.
But, you know,
There's
I don't
nothing in this
think
conditional use that's gonna say
You know,
he has to be quiet.
but I'm concerned about,
Exactly.
Start calling.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about, you know, them killing the trees and me having to have them all removed. That's not cheap. These are large trees. You know, I don't want them falling down on top of my building because they dug up the dirt and killed my roots. You know, and those are my objections. I don't mind the apartment houses. You know, the progress, city grows. But I just think that there'd be a better use for it.
You used to have an airplane body out in front of your place. didn't
Yes, I fly. Yeah.
Brian?
Yeah, I've been
Didn't
there
have
30
wings
years.
on it. I always thought that was kind of funny.
Well, I have 3 or 4 airplanes inside the shop without wings on them, but they all have ideas that one of these days they may fly again, you know. But that's all. Thank you, council.
To the point that he raised, could one of the conditions on any residential building there be that it has to be soundproofed? Have additional soundproofing as part of the building?
Could be, that's gonna be somewhat tricky to regulate because, you know, how, that gets, I mean, there's different methods you can do that, and then you gotta have like a dB, you know, decibel measurement, and then you gotta figure out, well, where are you gonna measure that from? Just to say soundproofing is not gonna really
Right. So
mean
we'd
a
have to
lot
be-
without
we'd
real
have to be
some
pretty
engineering
specific.
specifications, I would think.
I just don't think this is a good
I
fit
don't
for
either.
that piece
I
of
don't
property.
either, Mary.
I don't know how anybody's gonna even have children to play. I mean, you've got just an 80-foot wide
And the
lot.
drawing is only listing 16 parking spots. Is that enough for 10 units?
10 units, yeah, because we require 1.5 basically parking spaces per dwelling
So
unit with apartments.
none of
so-
them would ever have visitors.
I mean, they could add more if they
Yeah.
like, if there's room or
I
whatever,
mean,
but we require at
truly,
least
yes,
one
that's
Right, where there's
1.5.
no room. They're using every bit of it up.
There is room at the front to put more parking places, but it wasn't required.
Yeah, but you're gonna be right there on the highway almost.
Thank you, Brian. Anyone else like to speak for or against?
Are you sure these numbers of 44% green space coverage is correct?
Yes. because you got your building setbacks. I calculate all the setbacks and the green space, and it's pretty tight, but it is doable. What we've got here is the doable, because we had to rearrange it quite a few times to do it. But again, he is willing to do some, he told me he is willing to do a little bit of, to a certain extent, I'll say, soundproofing or what he needs to do. But he just said he's accepting the responsibility that this is, what he wants to do is some multifamily, and he's willing to take the chance of renting to whoever wants to rent there. But again, it's a lot less vehicle trips per day. It is a small piece of property, and it is, there is a place in the book for conditional use for it.
Anyone else like to speak for or against? We'll bring this back before the council. What is y'all's wishes?
It's just a tight fit.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't think it's,
Do we
So, Mr.
so how do we do this?
Chuck, well,
What's the best way?
yeah, negative motion or what?
yeah, I think this is what you and I have talked about. To have a motion,
You have a
positive motion, and just vote the way, so, that said, I make a motion, we approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve this conditional use permit. Any further discussion? If not, Mr. Garrett.
All those in favor say aye. All opposed?
no.
No.
Fails 0-7. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hawkins.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Tim.
Okay, next up is our Public Service Committee. Excuse me. Consider our first item on this agenda tonight is going to be consideration to approve the proposal of youth softball, sports uniforms for the Parks and Recreation Department. Ms. Bryce and Mr. Ibbotson. I'm trying not to cough. What are you doing? I'm trying not to cough.
Well, there's a much better use for that.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Jamie?
We had requests for proposals on our sports uniforms. The Parks and Recreation Department has grown a lot in the last 10 years, and we have a lot of little youth sports teams out there. So after looking at the cost of what we were spending on these per year, I thought that it was best for the city to go out and make sure that we were getting the best deal for those programs. So we submitted an RFP for that. We received 3 total from 3 different vendors, and you should have that detail in front of you. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
I make a motion, we accept Randy's athletics as proposed.
Second. I have a motion and a second to approve the proposals as presented. Any further discussion?
I've got a question.
Mr. Hawkins?
There was and I'm trying to find the email now, I was alerted to that today by, like I say, an email. And it said something about experience, that these were rated 10 points each, and there was an experience category apparently that wasn't on the bid specifications. And can you explain that and tell me what that was all about?
Yes, sir, I will do my best.
Or would you like Mr. Ibbotson to do that?
He
Either
may
one of you.
need to jump in here. Let me try for just 1 second, if you don't mind.
I'd be happy.
On the back, I think it was page 6 of our RFP, there's further disclosure to the experience and considerations that we made. We believe let me back up just a little bit. There was an evaluation done, 4 of our employees did an evaluation, and they based that experience on business that we've done with those vendors in the past, as well as just the overall RFP. They try to fill us in on experience that they've done, the vendors have done throughout their history. So it's based on the RFP that they submitted, as well as experience that the city has done with those vendors.
Mr. Ibbotson, did you bring those sheets with you that I asked you to bring? The individual sheets where the people that voted on this? I have the totals, but I don't have the individual sheets.
I've got that.
Do you have those, Ms.
Yes, sir.
Price?
Mr. Hawkins, what are you getting at? I mean, I don't,
Getting at, we have a lower bid for uniforms. And there's something that showed up in the bid process that was not listed, when the RFP went out. And when the determination was made that someone was going to be awarded those bids, there's a category on here that says experience. And there's nowhere in the RFP that says anything about experience, so I'm trying to find out where that came from. I don't know where that came from.
we've done business with Randy's. I mean, YDMA did for years, and then ever since I ever have known, yeah. So, I mean, they're very reputable.
So those are the individual evaluations, but I want to go back to that RFP on page 6. Under the terms and conditions of the RFP, that does give us room to evaluate those proposals the way that we did.
I'm sorry, would you say that again? I was trying to read, excuse me. You said,
Page 6 on the RFP, under the terms and conditions, should further disclose the way that we came about that evaluation.
do you have a copy of that? Page 6.
I don't with me, but I'll be glad to get that for you.
Any further discussion?
Well, generally, most of the time, we rank stuff by the cost, low bid. Personally, I don't know that that's always my favorite way to do it, because there's more to things than just the cost.
Exactly.
That said, when you get into subjective things like experience and location, you can see it might cause a little consternation. Thus, we default to low bid. Again, I like to see more factors than just cost involved, because you do get what you pay for in most cases. That said, you know, I don't know what Mr. Hawkins might propose tonight, but I definitely, going forward, might like to see this a little bit cleaner.
Yes, sir.
I'd sure like to have, when you put experience down, it needs to show exactly what you're asking for. And I can't tell that was ever addressed.
And I'm gonna take some of the blame for this. When we brought Jamie on as our procurement officer, I told her, I said, we want a good product, we want the best price, but we want quality as well. And I'm not talking about the quality of any of the T-shirt folks here. I'm talking about overall as a city. It's not always the bottom line. Sometimes you get what you pay for, and if you go with a low bid, that's what you get. Current subject excluded tonight. So I've asked Jamie to start looking, to set up a plan and to look at different specific items for everything that we purchase. And it's really paid off well for us. Not only we're getting a good solid price, we're getting good quality equipment. So I'll take the heat for this one tonight, and we'll work to come up with a little bit different way of doing it. But Jamie has done everything I've asked her to do.
And listen, you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
In your position. I got no problem with what you're doing. It's just there's a little bit of a.
I understand. I completely understand, and I want to be able to present you all what you want to see, and hopefully in the future we can do that.
Well, I think there's
Thank
kind of
you.
a dual component to it, experience as well. And, you know, there's experience obviously that the company would have in their business and the years in business, the specific, in the particular product, whether it's their specialty or some kind of, you know, side gig or whatever, for lack of a better term. But also the experience that the city has had with that particular company. So when we're rating experience, that might be something else. But those are both factors that can be weighed in to overcome lowest price.
And this was done by committee, Mr. Okay.
I have a motion already.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Mr. Garrett?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Passes 7-0.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Jamie. Next up, excuse me, sorry. Next up, we have an ordinance to authorize a personnel change and appropriating funds for a tennis manager within the Parks and Recreation Department. I see the tennis people are here tonight in force. Mr. Ibbotson.
In preparation for the opening of the tennis center, we are looking at bringing on a tennis pro. And the ordinance tonight requests $25,000 from the general fund to appropriate for that position to operate and maintain and run the tennis facility.
Do you have some people in mind? Or prospects? Potential?
We know there's some interest out there.
Okay. Thank you.
What's the annual salary for this full-time position?
$25,000.
Is how much?
The annual salary is $25,000. They have the opportunity to do lessons and make commissions.
Okay, so this is.
And the Parks Department, and the city gets.
Okay. I was thinking this 25,000 was prorated for the year.
It's $25,000 annually.
Okay.
And if it is a full-time employee, they need to be near the pro shop, I would think, rather than giving lessons during the.
Well, they'll be doing both. They'll be giving lessons. That's part of what you want your tennis pro to do, is to give lessons and promote tennis and work tournaments.
And he said part of it's going to the city also, part of his.
Yeah, their lessons
his
will, the
lessons.
city will get a percentage of every lesson that they get.
So this is a year-round position?
Correct.
Okay.
And part of their job would be, as you say, promote tennis, bring tournaments in, bring events
Correct.
in, to generate revenue as well.
Which we have a tournament scheduled for the end of April now.
So when will the grand opening be? Or the ribbon cutting? Or?
That's,
The
the
day
question was asked to me at least 4 times today.
Before April?
Before
Yeah,
the
before
tennis
April.
tournament, for sure. Hopefully sometime around the 1st of April. We've been dealing with a couple weather issues and temperature issues, and
It's moving along pretty good.
it's moving along.
Looking great.
Yes, it really is looking good.
Make a motion that we waive the 3 readings.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to waive the 3 readings. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 7-0.
Make a motion for adoption.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt this ordinance. Any further discussion? Mr. Garrett.
The ordinance 01821. Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Pruitt? Ms. Mel?
Aye.
Mr. Ledbetter?
Yes.
Mr. Grimes?
Aye.
Ms. Isby?
Yes.
Mr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Iverson. So who's going to play the opening match? All right.
Got 2 here, 2 takers.
Y'all should auction that off.
Yeah. Thank y'all.
Excuse me. Next up, we have consideration to remove fixed asset inventory from the Department of Information Systems and Technology. Mr. Knight.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor Casper, members of council. I think this is the 4th time I've been before you for the same thing. We're trying to clean out the building of equipment we've been hanging on to for a very long time. So this is the last, I think I'll be here for a little while anyway. Any questions?
Make a motion that we allow her removal.
Second.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. Did someone make a motion?
She
I
I'm sorry.
did, and Mary said.
Okay, I'm sorry, I could not hear. We have a motion and a second to approve removing the assets from fixed inventory listing. Any further discussion? Mr. Garrett.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Next up, we have a consideration to remove fixed asset inventory from the Animal Welfare Unit. Chief Spradlin. How'd that cruise go, Chief?
Welcome back.
It's 82 in Cozumel, Mexico, by the way. And I loved every bit of it. What we have is a request to remove these assets, 26 portable wire animal crates. You'll recall last year we had a $40,000 grant from ASPCA that gave us some new upgraded facilities from some outdoor kennels, and we no longer need these and are asking to sell them on publicsurplus.com.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve removing the assets from the fixed inventory listing. Any further discussion? Mr. Garrett.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
7-0. Chief's up again with an ordinance appropriating funds for the purchase of 4 compartment slide-in animal control boxes for the animal welfare unit.
Yeah,
Chief.
this is the big box you see in the back of our animal welfare units. This was cut from this year's budget, and we're asking now that we could be able to use the spay neuter account to buy this piece of equipment to put in a new animal welfare truck.
Motion to waive 3 readings.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to waive the 3 readings. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 7-0.
Make
I'm
a
sorry?
motion for adoption.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt this ordinance. Any further discussion? Mr. Garrett?
This will be 01822. Mr. Ledbetter?
Yes.
Ms. Mel?
Aye.
Mr. Grimes?
Aye.
Mr. Pruitt?
Aye.
Ms. Isby?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Passes 7-0. Chief Winter, would you come up here with Chief Spradlin in case we have any questions? Next up is ordinance appropriating funds for the 911 upgrade for the Conway Emergency Operations Center. This is something that the 2 chiefs and several other folks have been working on for some time. I did not put this in the 2018 budget because we had a moving target. We did not actually have a final tally on what this was going to cost us until Friday of last week. It is a significant amount of money that the city's going to have to pay, but I will let you 2 guys kind of tell us where we are.
Well, it's an upgrade of the 911 system. We're required to upgrade this every 5 years. Last time we did it was 2012. I say we're required. Basically, AT&T does not support their old systems after 5 years. So obviously, if we have an unsupported system and it breaks down, then we've got some major trouble when it comes to a 911 system. So we are to the point where we need to upgrade that. What cost us approximately $335,000 5 years ago is now coming in at about $709,000 over a 5-year period. So with that, through our discussions, as we did last time, how we split it with the county, we're going to split it based on the number of dispatch consoles that we have. The city has 5 dispatch consoles, and the county has 3 dispatch consoles, and each will be responsible for those upgrades as well as monthly fees over that 5-year period.
Wow. I make a motion we waive the readings.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to waive 3 readings. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And just for y'all's information, the 911 center on the city's end and the county's end, we're losing money annually. As you remember, when 911 centers first went into operation, the fees that were received were from hardwire phones that everyone had in their homes. Well, everybody's gone to cell phones now. So a lot of the funding sources for 911 centers is really starting to dry up, and it's a problem nationwide, and it's a problem that we're going to have to address here in the very near future. I think Judge Baker told me between us last year when we looked, between city and county, it was about a $1 million loss. 900,000 and some change.
We even talked about that in DC,
Yeah, and
didn't we?
we're actually looking, the chiefs have been looking at, along with Ms. Belote from OEM, have actually been looking at some options that they'll probably be bringing to y'all, depending on what the city attorney says in the future. Unless the city attorney says something else, then we won't be bringing it to y'all. So they're all working on something right now, but I just want you to know that the 911 center is going to be a constant till we come up with something.
Did we ever upgrade out there with the grant that Candy got?
No, because
Has that
there was
happened?
a lawsuit filed in the state about the state giving away those grants. We actually go to a hearing on that next month.
Yeah, it's coming up.
Coming up, we'll be heard before a judge, and Candy's gonna throw herself at the mercy of the court to see if we can get that money.
So we'll know something
We'll know
after that.
something,
yeah.
yes, in the very near future, because that's, as y'all know, that's a hard job that those people do out there, that the dispatchers do. It's probably,
Yes.
it's a thankless job, and you go from telling someone how to do CPR on a loved one to getting chewed out because someone's trash hadn't been picked up. So
Yeah.
we appreciate the job they do.
I make a motion to adopt this ordinance in the emergency clause.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt this ordinance with the emergency clause. Any further discussion? Mr. Garrett?
This will be 01823. Ms. Mel?
Aye.
Mr. Pruitt?
Aye.
Mr. Hawkins? Ms. Isby?
Yes.
Mr. Grimes? Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Ledbetter?
Yes.
In the emergency clause, Ms. Mel?
Aye.
Mr. Pruitt?
Aye.
Mr. Hawkins? Ms. Isby?
Yes.
Mr. Grimes? Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Ledbetter?
Yes.
Excuse me, those both passed 7-0. Thank you, chiefs. Appreciate the job y'all do. With that, I'll take any further business.
I make a motion to adjourn.
We're adjourned. Thank you all.
Love the new iPads.